Okay, let's get straight to the point. Competition manipulation, quite simply put, is cheating, folks. So that is what we are talking about. We are talking about the behavior of cheating. Now, you might be thinking about cheating in different ways. You might be thinking about it in terms of performance enhancing drugs, but maybe sort of like breaking the rules of a game. But we're going to talk specifically about manipulating competition. And that can be done by three groups of people. So group one are our performers. So performers can manipulate competitions, and we'll come back to that in a second. Secondly, we can have coaches. I guess that goes into managers, all kinds of different sort of concepts of a coach. And the third one is by officials. So when competition manipulation is done, it's done by one of these three groups. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of have a look at those or have a look at the different forms of competition manipulation and how they might apply to those different groupings. So let me just drag you down here and I'll put it in some kind of green color. What are the forms? What are the different forms of, and I'll call it CM, competition manipulation. What are they and what are we talking about here? Well, the first one I want to bring to you, let me choose a different color. The first one I want to bring to your attention is that of betting. Okay, now betting in itself is not an illegal activity, assuming one is an adult, assuming that one is permitted to bet and doing so in a legal fashion. But what we're talking about here is what you might call kind of betting as a form of cheating. So first of all, we would describe this as a form of deviance. So betting, first of all, is a form of deviance. Secondly, what we sort of want to say here is that a deviant behavior will increase the chance of what we're going to call match fixing and bribery. So betting, needing a sport to be sort of its outcome to be a particular way. So if people are betting large sums of money on the outcome of a sports event, for example, those are the sort of behaviours that are going to ultimately lead to things like match fixing, bribery, because there's so many financial rewards on it. We've also got an issue in the sense that players, let's think about footballers or jockeys or whatever, we could be talking here about players developing gambling problems. Okay, so gambling itself is to be questioned with regard to sport performers. We can also say it can lead to addiction. Okay, so these are potential issues for people, and we're talking about sports performers, but they could obviously relate to anyone in society. If we just go a little bit further here, I also want to stress here that what we've got a huge volume of adverts. So we've got a huge volume of adverts. Go and try and watch a football match over the next week on the TV and you will be bombarded with gambling messages. It happens all the time. And also think about those gambling companies as sponsors. They are sponsoring a great deal. The other thing we can say about betting is that it's broadly now done online. There are exceptions, of course, but that online access gives lots of versatility. In other words, it becomes far more convenient. So one can gamble when one is at a match, prior to a match, during a match. That can all be done. Now, obviously, if something like betting is to be done by a player, for example, the potential there for them to try and have that outcome actually occur goes up. Now, let's take this further. This might lead, it doesn't have to be via betting, obviously, but this might lead to something like match fixing. Okay, match fixing. First of all, match fixing is a form of cheating. And the essence of it is when someone takes payment, it's when someone takes payment to fix the outcome. And obviously we're talking about of a sporting contest here. So the outcome is fixed by, let's say, a referee who makes decisions in a certain direction, a player who plays up or down in order to get the right outcome they want. And the point I want to make is notice the potential combination of these factors. Betting and match fixing generally are linked. Now, not always the case, but where there's been large sums of money gambled, that can obviously lead to pressure, and a pressure being applied to different people who might match fix, and that might be how this comes out. We've also got the idea of what we might call insider information. Now, this has been not uncommon in sport in the last 50 years, and the idea here is that we're not talking so much about the outcome of a match and that being fixed, but someone who's on the inside, let's say a coach, let's say a player, they can give information out to people who can gamble, let's say, on team selection. You can gamble on who's in the team. You could gamble, if it was cricket, on who's bowling first. You could gamble on, for example, when the first no ball is bowled in cricket. Now, I use that example specifically because there was a major controversy in cricket about this exactly. You could also gamble about playing orders. Imagine having an insider in, I don't know, by the way, to my knowledge, this has never happened, but in the Wimbledon tennis tournament, and you know that for the following day before the event is put, for the playing order is published, you know that Murray or Sabalenka or whoever's going to be playing first on centre court. Obviously, you could gamble on this and make money out of it. And also, you can also receive insider information about injuries. Of course, if performers are injured, it means that their tendency, or the team's tendency to win, might change. Therefore, that kind of information can be bought. And the final one I want to talk about here is what we call tanking. Tanking, what we mean by this is when someone deliberately loses. Okay, so think about a tennis player, a badminton player just constantly hitting into the net or missing the court. That would be, if that was deliberate, that would be called tanking. It's actually easier than winning. If you think about it, losing is broadly in your control. Winning isn't, because the other person can obviously play better. And also, it's quite easy to hide this, and maybe not as easy as one would think, but it can be hidden as well. So, with all these considerations in play, what are our strategies? What are we to do in sport to eliminate or reduce these possibilities? Well, first of all, we want strict rules. Okay? Strict rules goes without saying. This is an interesting one. It is argued there should be harsher punishments. Now, I've got mixed feelings about this, because there is a very strong sort of phenomenon in what you might call crime and punishment, what have you, that if you make punishments very, very harsh for low-level things, then people will just do bigger scale crimes or acts, because you're going to get punished harshly anyway. So that's an interesting one. You've got to get a balance with that one. We also need high levels of coordination. Now, I don't mean in the way that people move here, high levels of coordination, but what we mean by this is that an organisation, for example, let me go back to my Wimbledon example, they need to have very sort of specific schedules. They need to have their fixtures, which are published in advance. So all of this stuff cannot, becomes sort of transparent, I suppose. We also want relationships between companies. Okay, so if, for example, a rugby player is gambling heavily in 4 or 5 different gambling companies, those relationships between, or whatever, it's Paddy Power and Ladbrokes or whatever, they can coordinate and sort of be aware of that situation. Other strategies, where these things become illegal in society, we could be talking about prison sentences. That has been used in the past, but perhaps the most proactive way to do this is performer or player education. Make sure that people moving into elite sport, those being also officials and coaches, have the right guidance and support to avoid these behaviours in the first place. Cheers.